Thanks, everyone. Is everyone here? All right. So I would like to start asking 2 questions. Please raise your hand if you have ever used reactive forms before. Yeah? All right. Good number. And please raise your hand again if you have ever used dynamic component loaders, the technique of loading that components dynamically. Okay. All right. I'm going to be talking a lot about those 2 techniques in this talk. All right, so my name is Juan Stoppa, and I'm a software engineer at Wealth Dynamix. And today I would like to talk about one of the biggest challenges that I face while building software for the enterprise. And as easy as it sounds, the challenge is building forms. But why building forms for the enterprise is such a challenge? So first of all, capturing large amounts of information. If you think about the process of applying for a mortgage application, there's so much information that you need to capture, and someone needs to physically type in that information. And then we have, complex validation rules, and the validation rules keep changing all the time. So most of the forms that I've seen out there needs to be rebuilt every time that the validation rule changes. So then the requirements tend to be very vague. To give you an example, GDPR came into effect this year, and companies are still trying to figure out, what information they need. And finally, the designer tends to get very creative with mock-ups and how forms should be. And there's nothing wrong with being very creative, but not always follow the best practice of the UI framework. So today, I'm very excited to show you a framework that I've been working on in the last few months. So this framework attempts to fix all the issues that I talked before and bring a scalable solution to building forms. You can also use this one for any other type of application. But anyway, I'm going to go ahead, and this form uses reactive forms. It uses dynamic component loader, NGRX, and GraphQL. And I call it FormQL. And I'm going to give you a quick demo on this. So here we have a form. So just so you understand, this form, the definition of this form is a store in the server in a database in the JSON format. This JSON is downloaded into the client, and the client renders the form programmatically. And of course, since I use NGRX, I have a store with my information. So if I type information here in, my store will get updated, as you can see. And then if I put some other information there, the store gets all the information that I get. So there are 2 things that I want you to understand from here. Is every single field in this form is a component that has been loaded programmatically using the dynamic component loader. And then the other important thing is the store here. It has 3 objects, I will call it. The data object, that is where from the information that you type in the form is stored. The form object, that is the definition of where all the fields are located in the form. And then the component, which is a normalized list of all the fields and its property. So there is another thing that I can do in here. I'm going to just put an ID of a record, for instance. And here, the information got loaded into the data and then populate into the form. But I'm going to come back to this one later. So here is a more graphical representation of what happened there. So you have a layout that tells you or format gives you the definition of the main form. Then the layout can have pages in case you want to have in your form multiple tabs. And then each page will have multiple sections, and the section can have multiple components. So it's basically a tree structure of that. And then you have the form group, which is a property of the reactive forms. And it's an identical tree structure of the form metadata. So for every level in the tree, you have a form group that will assign. So you will be able to calculate the validation or validate that component at that level of the tree. So something very important to take into here is that the store dictates the validation rule with a new state. So that's in the that's the form metadata is stored in the NGRX store or Redux store. The form group lives at the component level, and it just takes all the validation or the new state from the form metadata and applies the validation rules. And let me, all right, sorry. So that's all good. So what we have so far is a framework that allows you to set some sort of a JSON that gets downloaded into the client, and the client programmatically set all the fields on the form. So what about if we want to modify this form? So one way could be just, we log into the server, grab that JSON, put it into a form editor, and start fiddling with it. But you don't really want to do that. That will be really tedious. So for that, I created a form editor. So I'm going to give you a quick demo on that too. So in here, I go to my form. I'm going to just add the word edit at the end. So this one, just to specify, I created this route specifically just to input parameters into the main component in the form. So this is the editor, right? So what you can do here is, for instance, you can drag and drop fields around, right? Like that, for instance. You will notice here the action that are going into the store. I'm going to save it. Let me just make sure that I save it. And yeah, I have a save action there. And then if I load it, you see, the fields get populated. So it's definitely real, So I'm just going to move this one back because I need to use in this one for the rest of the talk. Oops. Right. All right, cool. That's good. All right, so how the form is loaded? So how is the initial load? So an action sent from the form QL component into the store. The store, using side effects, loads the initial store, basically the initial state, sorry. The state then is sent back into the form QL, where the form groups applies all the validation, and then the components are rendered. So the same happens with changing the states. So what we do here is a keystroke is detected, or it could be a drag and drop, and then all the store revalidates or recalculates the state. A new state is sent back into the form QL component. The form group again, recalculates the state and send a notification to all the components to only the component that we want to modify. So what we've seen so far then is a framework that allows you to, in some ways has two modes. A view mode that is all about editing data, and an edit mode that is all about editing form metadata. But there is another mode that is really important, really useful for building forms. So what do you normally do when you're building forms? You will probably start with a state, with a model, or defining your data model. Your data model then, you will probably create a table on the database, and it could be, or it could be a document, or it could be columns or properties, and then we will decide this is my data, and you will store it there, and then just move into the client and into how you can get the user to enter this information. So it will be really good if you can combine these together. So in the sense that you can edit the data and the metadata at the same time. So that's what the live edit mode is about. You can edit your data and your form metadata at the same time. I'm going to show you a demo on that too. So in here, in the root, I'm just going to put the ID of the record I was using, and I'm going to put the live edit mode. So you can see here now that you have the form with data, and you can do the same thing as I did before, the same properties. So one thing here, the data source of the form, and here's where you can define your GraphQL query to download your data. So in here, you can pass your ID and then define all the fields that you want in your form. I couldn't get the ACE editor just to put it nicely formatted. In here, so you will get all the properties that you want, and then you have the mutation, which you can pass an object from the store, and then do the mapping. So this will be when you hit the save button. So it works in the same way. So that's one of the main properties. Then you have here all the things if you want to add a page, section, or component. And then the important thing is also if you want to edit a component, you will you can go here and and modify your label if you want. Here's the name of the component that I'm loading programmatically in the background. And then you have the properties. And that's the very important thing is the data mapping. You have a component that contains a field, and you want to map that field into something in the store. So in this case, is the first name, right? So in some ways, like subscribing to a property in the store. And then we have the validators. And here's where the beauty of I would say, comes. Is you have the calculated field is when you want to calculate an act. Well, let's say that you want total in your form, right? You can calculate an expression. That expression is going to be calculated against your store. I'll show you later an example, I think, that will make it more clear. Then we have the hidden condition, read-only condition, and required condition. So this is a condition against that is calculated against the data store, and you can tell it when a field is hidden, when a field is read-only, or when a field is required, right? And you can also add your custom validator if you want. So for instance, here I'm in the first name field. What about if I want to make this field required? So I can just put true, just as a condition, static condition, and just say, please enter first name, and save it. And then you'll see here that the field is required now. If I remove the data, that becomes required. But then you can do more complex things. Like, for instance, what about if you want to hide the mobile phone field if you haven't entered the first name? You can say, well, contact dot first name and negate it. So in that way, if I remove this one here, then this field will become hidden. I just put an icon here, and in edit mode, I'm just not hiding the field because I want the user just to be able to do. But if I save this one, did I get my action to save? Yes. So then I show it into here. Right. And I'm going to remove that. You see, the mobile field is gone. So if I enter some data, it's coming back up. All right. That is... All right. So that's all good. We have a framework that allows you to modify, to create forms and configuring. But what about if you want to extend it? What about if you want to create your own components, or you have a designer that comes and say, I want to drag and drop a functionality in the form. So that's something that FormQL will allow you to do. So here, for instance, I have, again, it's the app architecture. I have the component and all the components involved on the framework. So just notice that the layout and the components are loaded programmatically using Dynamic Component Loader. So, and something that I didn't tell you is that FormQL, in this case, is a library that has been imported into an Angular app. So then you can create your own custom layout and your own custom component, and they can be loaded programmatically. So and that's really powerful, because then you can extend your application without breaking your main framework. And of course, the component that we create, they will need to be, or to adhere to some sort of input parameters, I would say. So in this case, you have a custom component. So I can just call it my custom component. The component name is something that you will need to also put the name of the component. This is the case if you build a production build your Angular app, the name of your component will change. So that's the way to still identify it. And then you have validators. In here, you can put custom validators if you want, or you can put the existing reactive forms validator. Of course, you need to implement the control value access, or that's something that you need to do for to create any field, any custom field in reactive forms. So then we have an input that is a field, and you also you get the form group, which is basically when I took in my level tree-level structure, the component level, there's going to be a form group, and that will allow you, to be notified for changes and that sort of stuff. So just let me give you another demo on this one, on how I use a dynamic component. So if I go back to my form, and I'm just going to make this one a bit bigger, I have another form that I created that I call it mortgage application. Right? So here, let's say that I'm a client or a prospective client that wants to apply for a mortgage application, right? So I'm gonna here start, putting my details. And here, so before I continue, is, sometimes I kind of understand design when they come with these, creative or funny, we'll say funny mock-ups. But completing a form application or a mortgage application is really boring. So you really want to get the user in some way, or the client engaged when you are filling up your details. So this is something that will allow, so the framework will allow you to do. So let's say that I'm applying for a £100,000 mortgage, right? And then, as you can see here, you get the total payments, which is calculated using the calculated field that I showed you earlier. Then I will say I've got 25 years is the mortgage period. And then I managed to get a 2% interest rate. So you can instantly show information to the user. So these two components, or these two graphs that you can see here, they are actually custom component built outside of the framework. And as you can also, if you want, let's say that I wasn't that lucky and the interest rate is a little bit higher, then you instantly can see your mortgage amortization and all data. Or even if you are, you wouldn't go with that, but let's say, I don't know, 3%, and then still, you get the same amount of information. So I think I've got a bit of time here. I'm going to show you how this one works. So if I go into the edit form of this form, in here I've got my app chart, right? And my data mapping is again contact. So I want the contact object to be notified when the whole contact object is changed. And then you have the custom config, which here is a model that lives in the custom component. So in here is where you can put the data that is going to map against your object. Hope it makes sense what I'm saying. But that's the way that you can keep extending your component without still using the framework and extending it outside of the framework. All right. Okay, so what's next for my framework? So what I'm really intended to do is just get feedback. If you guys can grab me in the office hours, or just you have my Twitter handle there, if you wanna just tell me what you think about it. I'm planning to do some other stuff on this, and I just want to get as much feedback as possible. I'm planning to integrate the Angular Material CDK. It's all the cool feature that it brings now. For instance, now we have a drag and drop, and that's something that I will definitely try to be using. I want to put support for RESTful APIs. GraphQL I think it's great using it with GraphQL, but I don't want to be limited only to GraphQL. And also, I know that the Apollo people are doing a lot of work for the Angular community. That's what I heard on Facebook. So I think they are intending to create a store where you can put all your information from the GraphQL queries. So that's something that I'm going to be looking at. All right, so and then the conclusion is, so reactive forms are really good. If you don't use them, I really recommend it. It really helps you to have your form in an immutable state, and you can only, you only safely change it by sending action or modifying it from the form groups. The dynamic component loader is a technique that I've used it in a lot of applications, even in production before, and it works really well. So you basically create your application or your core of the application in a separate package, it could be, and keep extending it with with components that are loaded programmatically. And that's, you can try components that work well, then you can probably throw it away and then just get another one. And that really extensibility is what it allows you to do. So, and then the NGRX is a one source of truth. I think is great. I think there is a lot of people that think NGRX is probably or I overheard that the NGRX could be sometime. Sorry, it could be. So if you have you don't want to use it for every single case. I think there are in certain cases that make sense to use it. In this case, I just find it great to use it. And the GraphQL, you don't want to be downloading all your data from your APIs, or you build an API and start adding attributes, because as it happens, you need your API for completely different thing. So in GraphQL, at least you can cherry pick your data and say, this is what I want in my fields, and I can change it whenever I want. And there is something that I always say, it is very important to innovate when you are building web applications. And there is no silver bullet solution to solve all the problems, So I strongly advise everyone to use the technology that works best for you and your team. All right. Thank you very much. All right.